Okay. I'll get us started. This is, what is it, Monday, February 5th. It's 6:45. We're back on our enabling ad hoc session. Apologize for the delay. We've gotten through some technical issues, but we have the whole group and the whole band with us today. We are missing Commissioner Ordash. She has the week off, so we all wish her well and hope she's having a relaxing time away on some island somewhere. Today, we had originally planned to discuss sections specifically related to the Inspector General as well as the CPRA, specifically 2.46 and 2.47 of the enabling ad hoc ordinance and those and related sections that are in 2.45. I know that Ms. Grenache had sent an email about a little bit earlier today, talking about wanting to focus some on a particular section of 2.45. That was 2.45040 sub E. I think that specifically relates to notifications from the city administrator. I'll take some stock of the group about how if they want to stick with our plan of working on 2.46, 2.47, and 2.47, or just going line by line, knowing that we will, even though our plan was to focus on 2.46 and 2.47, we are flexible. We can work on whatever works best, but we will eventually get to those sections, 2.45 and the remainder sections. Thoughts?
You said that was 2.45.040 or 040
Yeah.
E?
Sub E, that's the section that Ms. Grenache emailed about at about 2:16 p.m. earlier today.
Yeah, I just saw that email just a few minutes ago. Sorry about that.
I think I may have missed that email, or I think I may not have received that one. So
let's okay. I see. Why don't we do this, Ms. Grenache, with your forgiveness, perhaps we can table that discussion unless it comes up as our natural discussion in 2.46 and 2.47. Have us table it to the next session to give Mac some time and others some time to take a look at your very thoughtful questions in that email.
No problem.
I hope that's okay. I appreciate
Sure.
it. And I'll make sure to save it so that we remember it for next time. Okay. One of the things that I thought of when I was going through the two sections of 2.46 and 2.47 were both some of the changes to the enabling ordinance, but also, as a continuation of our discussion last week of what it is that we might want outside of the proposed changes that were out of the council person's office. And also, that kind of just led to some other thoughts, which was, well, what do we see as the roles of each respective agency, the commission, the inspector general, and CPRA in a future that doesn't include the NSA? Partly because we want whatever changes to be made to be enduring and to sort of think ahead as to what might work in the future when we are out of the NSA, because that is, I think, hopefully that's going to happen at some point. But and so I hope we can have just a short discussion about where we might see the respective roles of the commission, the IG, and the CPRA. And I think we're rather lucky to have with us some of the main proponents and sort of some of the thought leaders of LL and S1, Ms. Leonard and Ms. Grenache, to sort of talk about sort of what that model is that you all were thinking about when you were helping draft, helping propose, helping amend, and sort of pushing and promoting LL and S1.
Are you asking me?
I'm gonna let
asking.
you take.
Yeah.
Well, I was the role for Measure LL. later. So I'm going to involve you.
I can lead off.
Please.
So the origin of ILL in particular, I think I referenced this at our last meeting, was an effort to make sure that once we were out of the NSA, which we had anticipated to be much earlier, that we would have in place a way for the city to ensure that the gains that were made in that process of the federal oversight of all these reforms would be sustainable. We know that in other cities where there have been consent decrees, that after the city signs off and the federal oversight ends, that there are regressions, that the city falls back and the police department falls back into the ways that got them there in the first place. And we wanted to make sure that Oakland did not follow that pattern. And so the idea was to create a structure that foremost was independent of the city administrator's control. That was the reason it required a ballot measure rather than an ordinance, was so that the apparatus that had been under the city administrator, the CPRB, would be changed and would be independent of that structure. The reason being that the CPRB director, who was in charge of investigating complaints against the police, would be reporting to the overseer of the police, which, and his or her job essentially would be on the line, because that person could be removed by the city administrator. So we believe that a cornerstone priority would be for the entity that oversaw the police department with respect to accountability would be divorced from the city administrator to allow it greater independence. And that was the primary motivation for it. And we also believe that we've seen with other boards and commissions in Oakland that even though there are Oakland residents, excuse me, appointed, they follow the lead typically of the staff person who belongs to the city administration. The Oakland residents usually defer because they believe that they are not as expert in the field as the staff person that is guiding the process. We saw that with the CPRB, where the commissioners, board members were very deferential to the CPRB director and rarely challenged that person. That is why we put in our model the citizens on the commission in charge of the so-called experts rather than the other way around. We wanted to invert the power and give the power to the Oakland residents to direct the professional staff that they oversaw rather than the other way around. And I think those are the two main things I would focus on, unless you have more specific questions.
I really appreciate that background. I do see that in some of the way that LL works, the structure of LL, the fact that the commission sort of has the power to oversee fire hire, agency director, the police department, to sort of have the way it's written is specific as to what the commission's power is. and how it might work vis-a-vis the police department and the agency. What can you tell us about S1 and how that interplay, how that sort of those two guiding principles kind of works in with the amendments with S1?
The role of the Inspector General was supposed to have been in Measure LL. Unfortunately, Dan Cobb wasn't able, due to the time constraints, to fashion the language that he wanted in time for it to be passed by the city council and placed on the ballot. So we missed it. And as a result of that, we tried to get it in the ordinance, but the city administrator and the city attorney essentially vetoed the provision in the ordinance that made the inspector general subject to the commission. And instead, they argued that the charter prevented that because department heads needed to report to the city administrator as per the charter. And therefore, it being in the ordinance rather than in the charter, they denied the ability of the commission to have that position responsible to the commission. We had a big fight about it. Actually, the city council approved it, but the city administrator and the city attorney essentially nullified it. And it would have required a lawsuit to overturn that. So instead, we decided to cool our heels and come around with a charter amendment, which was S1.
To the extent that sort of well, let me first ask: was S1 the original envisionment of what you had wanted but couldn't get in time in LL?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Appreciate that. And then so I'm hearing you say that the IG is responsible to the commission or reports to the commission. What was that framework? What was your envisionment of what that model looks like?
I think that we definitely wanted the IG to report to the commission rather than to the city administrator. And the idea would be that the commission would oversee 3 departments: the police department, CIPRA, and the office of the inspector general.
What would that oversight look like in sort of the
That's what
the model that
that's
it
what
says?
we've been wrestling with. I think that the charge was defined pretty specifically in S1. And I think Director Phillips is very familiar with it because it defines the scope of the work of the IG. And I think the role of the commission is probably just to prioritize the different aspects of that work. I think the idea of the commission would be that based on the investigations done by CIPRA and what might be revealed in the patterns of misconduct that are revealed in those complaints, that the commission would be able to direct the IG to certain specific areas of police misconduct or other issues that arose in the commission's work.
Appreciate that. Anything else you want to tell us about sort of, I guess, what's the word? I guess it's called the legislative history of S1 and LL, or sort of what the thinking was or the framers behind it.
I think I've pretty much covered it. Unless you have any more specific questions. I think the idea really was to create a structure within the city government that would be an authoritative way to maintain the kind of oversight that has been provided in the federal oversight, that we would continue to be able to audit the department, to review and change policy as needed, that the nature of the complaints that would be investigated and adjudicated would give us a way to determine the degree to which compliance was still evident in the department or the degree to which compliance was falling off. So, I mean, I think the idea would be as a way for the city to essentially continue to oversee and maintain the assurance of compliance with the reforms that were contained in the NSA, as well as other issues that may not have been foreseen and included, but that would arise subsequently.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Chair, Marcia.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Granage. That's very, very important. Like Commissioner Shea said, legislative history, and we're fortunate to have you here to provide us with that. I think we're getting, though, on the commission, the issue that I have seen is about what constitutes direction and what constitutes prioritization of the work. What can you enlighten us about that?
I think that this really depends to some extent on the degree to which the commission is able to receive information from the community about their experience with the police department. I think one of the problems has been the lack of community engagement, as you well know. And I think the need to address that is fundamental, because that's the only way that you can really get a handle on how policing is being done. There is a very small percentage of people who feel they have been wronged by the police that actually file complaints. And the group that I came from, Pueblo, was the major group in Oakland that did offer a hotline on misconduct complaints. And we kept a database of those complaints. And we facilitated the people who called us, we facilitated them filing complaints with the CPRB. But since Pueblo no longer exists as an organization functionally, there has been a gap in that, and there's been no ability to fill that gap by any other organization that I'm aware of. And so I think that somehow improving the commission's outreach and making it more feasible or important for people, right, who have had experiences with the police that are negative, to file complaints is extremely important, because that's the way you find out whether the policies that you have put in place are actually being implemented, and whether, when they're not being implemented, there are any consequences as a result of that, right? And so all of that falls into the CIPRA bucket, but that is what should be a funnel to the commission to identify the priorities that you want the IG to look into, and to figure out which policies need to be addressed, and what, for example, maybe the discipline matrix needs to be adjusted, or some other changes need to occur in order to remedy the problems that you discover?
Well, we're certainly taking a harder look at our community outreach and presence. We're trying to explore, in fact, Director Muir and I discussed this morning, places throughout the city. You don't have to have a daily presence, but you have to have a reliable presence, satellite presence. Maybe just commit to certain days of the week and certain hours. And we're trying to look at that. I did an outreach to the Justice Ministry at Allen Temple. They have a huge social services, Alameda County Social Services present on their campus. And I'm trying to explore whether or not there's some space that an intake person from CIPRA could maybe sit twice a week for 4 hours or something. I don't know. We're still looking at it. And of course, the Eastmont Mall has a huge social services presence also. And there might be opportunities there. So we're gonna look at that and try to stand that up as soon as we can. But I'd like to hear from the director about how, when you describe the information from the community flowing through CIPRA and how we are able to capture that information, feed it to the commission, and direct the work of the OIG if necessary.
And Ms. Grenage, I think one of the central challenges is that post Copley, a lot of the things that happen, and that's the 2006 California Supreme Court ruling that limited a lot of the accessibility of our agency's materials. A lot of the information that we receive as an agency never reaches the commission, right? You see that there's a big list of closing cases, of pending cases, and that there will only be a small handful of those that the commission ever actually reads the closing report, or at least in a timely fashion. Maybe they'll get it, see it 3 or 4 years later in some cases. And I think that right now, from my perspective, a more obvious, because of the Copley issue, a more obvious way to get that information to the IG's office is through just direct referral at some juncture, or to figure out creating an institutional process where we just say, hey, commission, here are the issues that we're seeing, and normalize that. Because I think for me, I find certain flags, maybe I'll let the IG know about it, but it's not built into the system in a way that is anything other than relationship driven, or just, there'll be an urgent issue, or the IG or Charlotte will be in a meeting and they'll see a problem as it's happening. But I think that's a current limitation to that flow going through the commission. There's just so much of these, so much of the information we have is just buried in personnel files that are not available to the public, certainly, and sometimes may not be immediately available to the commission unless I flag, hey, you need to look at this one case to understand a problem. But usually it's aggregate, so it would take looking at many, and maybe needs to be summarized in a broader sense, where that's an IG responsibility. The line gets blurry, I think, when you talk about it that way, if that makes sense.
Ms. Rashida?
Yes, ma'am.
So were you able to hear what the director was saying about how matters are kind of flow up to the commission, and whether or not, I'd like to hear whether or not that's what you envision, that in going through their cases, he was saying, well, Mac, I don't want to misparaphrase, but something to the effect that only certain matters that we would be able to, would be able to see that he would think would flow up to the commission.
Well, all I can talk about is what I experienced previously with the CPRB, which is that they would notice that there were clusters of cases that fell under the same umbrella. One that I remember distinctly had to do with people who had their cars towed but were left stranded, and in some cases in the middle of the night in places that were unsafe. And there were several of those complaints.
Mhm.
And so that caused the commission or the board at that time to look at recommending a change in policy that they recommended to the police department, that when they were going to tow somebody's car, they made sure that the person or people involved were not just left wherever they were, but were moved somewhere that was safe, if not transported home, at least brought someplace that was safe where they could maneuver from that point to get home, or whatever else was appropriate given the circumstances. But they're noticing that there were several of those kinds of complaints. The director was able to bring that information to the board, and the board was then able to look at the need for that policy to change, right? And I don't think, with all due respect, Mac, I don't think this has any Copley implications. I mean, there's no need to reveal names, places, or any other specifics that would violate the Copley ruling to provide that kind of information to either the IG or to the commission.
Yeah,
And I think, similar complaints about handcuffs being too tight, for example, or rudeness, or not explaining the reason for a stop, or any of those kinds of things can be generalized, I think, and summarized. And you can report to the commission that, we had X number of complaints about rudeness where the officer refused to say why the person was being detained, or some other generalization that you can bring to the commission's attention. I think that's what we're talking about.
absolutely. I appreciate that. And yeah, I know from a Copley lens, of course, we can pass on information to the IG's office without that type of request. But I think there are certain junctures where you see something in a case and my impulse might be, hey, we should change this. And then of course, the next question is, well, why? And, but I think you can anonymize that. I do agree. And even just hearing the vision of that, it makes a lot of sense. And there have been examples of things that have been flagged in that particular way. And I jump when you say clusters of misconduct to perhaps specific officers.
What I'm getting though is the need to have a lens on the cases that are egregious or pattern and practice. You see, these complaints, they seem to be coming from one area. They seem to be dealing with one racial group or ethnic group or things like that. I think broader categories rather than, specific incidents, something that calls out a violation or a slippage under the NSA that you see as you are going through the various cases?
Yeah, absolutely. And that speaks to our need for a policy role. My understanding is the CPRB had a data person who was aggregating this. And so I could see, let's say, a bad use of force or something as narrow as like towing, and then the person gets left, and I could go to the policy person and say, hey, can you just run the last 5 years and see those keywords? And then I can have that in 20 minutes as opposed to now where it would take more like 20 days without having that lens.
Okay.
Which you'll see in my budget proposal for next year.
Okay.
We've had some time to talk.
I don't know if Charlotte wants to speak on any of this. Are we getting really off base, or?
I think it's good basic sort of modeling and sort of an expectation of what roles are and where people are coming from, so that we can sort of go through this enabling ordinance with an eye towards what the vision was and how it's playing out, as well as sort of what improvements can be made, what sections need to be there, don't need to be there, and probably illuminate some of the changes that were proposed here, as well as lets us think a little bit more about what changes might still be needed. Yes, you had it right on the nose there, Chair. I was about to turn to Charlotte to see if the IG, what you may think as an institution about some of this vision and model that was envisioned when this all began.
First of all, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
As you know, I'm definitely not the IG, but for my 2 cents worth, I agree with Chair Peterson regarding how this, should work for CPRA and how that works together. How it applies to the IG's office might be a little bit different, though.
Okay.
Sorry, you're muted there. Oh.
Okay, I'm sorry. How it applies to the IG's office might be a little bit different, in that we're required to make certain audits and evaluations of the tasks, and they're not dependent on individual groups of cases. So how that applies to how we're working might change, if that makes sense.
I am hoping you can help us understand a little bit more. I'm having a little bit of trouble sort of understanding where you're coming from.
Well, I'm saying I understand where the director and the chair, how they're discussing how that might play out with CPRA. But I think that it might be a little bit different for the relationship with the OIG, in that we have certain requirements of investigations and audits that audits and evaluations and inspections that we're required to do that aren't dependent on groups of cases necessarily. Understanding that at the commission, of course, directs us to do certain groups based on information from CPRA, we would definitely do that. But we also have other areas where we gather information for audits and inspections that are different, that aren't necessarily dependent on groups of cases that are going on. So while I understand how that might work with CPRA, I think it might be a little bit different with the Office of the Inspector General, for one. In addition to the 52 tasks, we monitor these meetings, like the risk management meetings, IAD meetings, where we also gather information for what we inspect and audit. And so that's a little bit different as well. So I kind of would like to see it in collaboration, how, exactly how you mean.
Ms. Grenache mentioned something about how sort of the envisionment of the model that they made through LLNS1 was there's an investigatory arm which kind of brings issues to mind to the commission, and then the commission sets priorities for audits, or priorities, period. That's maybe not even for audits, but maybe here's something you should watch out for, here's something we're interested in. Will you take a look and see what you're gleaning from your different information sources. Does that fit within sort of what the what the IG's office is thinking of as they're working through its day-to-day tasks?
I think that, of course, that fits into our agenda. Whatever the commission decides we should look at, we would definitely, put it on our schedule to consider and how it fits into whatever we're working on. But I think in addition to those areas, there are so many other factors that play into what we look into: sexual assault, neighbors, things that aren't necessarily dealing with cases in particular. So I think it's kind of a combination of the two, or both areas. So yes, it absolutely plays a part. And as we're overseen by the commission, if that's what you guys determine, we're definitely considering those as well. But we also have other areas that we consider when we look for inspections and evaluations and audits. In addition to evaluating and conducting inspections of CPRA itself. So those wouldn't necessarily come from CPRA as a factor of the cases. They would come from us and making sure that CPRA is doing what they're supposed to do, as the ordinance says. So that's also a little bit different.
Yeah, it certainly is. Certainly is. Ms. Grenache, I saw you unmute and then mute again. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I think it's an important conversation to have, because it really does speak to the integration of the three kind of bodies, and the ways in which they are connected, and the roles that each play, both separately and in conjunction with each other. And I think that's kind of what this ordinance is dealing with, right? And so what is the correct relationship between the IG's office and the commission, CIPRA and the commission, and the IG's office and CIPRA, right? So that's the kind of delicate dance that the ordinance is trying to accomplish. So I agree with what Chief Jones just said, that the IG's office has certain mandated functions that are described in the charter, but those are not necessarily to the exclusion of the issues that surface in the CIPRA investigations, right? And all of that then feeds into the commission in terms of providing the information the commission needs to establish its own priorities and figure out how to oversee and assign prioritization to each of those two agencies.
Thank you.
What we
Sure.
maybe, thank you, Jesse, what we may be moving towards, especially as we approach our retreat, is to focus on what we want accomplished. And that might include something we would like to direct the IG to do. We don't necessarily direct. I think we got into some sort of space where we thought, and this was not me, but I'm just saying the commission might have thought that we directed the work or directed the IG in the work that the OIG does. But what I'm hearing and what was the thought behind creating through the charter an Office of Inspector General was to create specific audits, like Charlotte just explained to us, certain tasks that by charter they have to perform. And then there are things that the commission wants to ask the IG to look into. A lot of that may flow from something that happened in the city involving the police, and it's not a citizen's complaint, but it needs to be addressed, and maybe that's something that the IG would only be best capable of doing, or something, and not individual cases, Mac. I'll never want to, unless it was something very, a very flagrant gap in the way that a policy was being implemented by the police department. And we can see the impact of that in the community. And something needs to be done. And that might be, and I don't know what that would be, but that might be something we would need the IG. And that's how we, in our lane, as Ms. Rashida said, these three entities trying to figure out how they communicate and work with one another. That might be our role as the commission. Twee, you're shaking your head. Do you have something in this space where we're trying to get a broad sense of the legislative history and what our roles are supposed to be? Because there started to be a lot of talk about power. And I think we're trying to roll back from, who has the power, but who has the responsibility and what those responsibilities are.
Well, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity with your question. Ms. Grenache, I really just so appreciate hearing from you directly around the legislative intent and the vision. Just even, the behind the scenes on LL and S1 and how S1 did that. Wow. and let alone some real thought process around the notion of CIPRA and noticing patterns or cluster of cases to be able to then think thoughtfully and direct the OIG office around, for the commission to direct the OIG office around policy making to address those patterns or clusters of cases. I do really appreciate, Chief Jones, your comment, though, because it's in addition to those policies and clusters of cases that are in CIPRA, the charter also explicitly talks about the NSA tasks, right? And being able to, and those tasks don't necessarily flow from CIPRA types of clusters of cases, right? Like disparity and discipline of our task 45 alone would not be normally coming out of CIPRA cases per se, although it would be interesting as CIPRA notice itself how it's disciplining and notice how police is disciplining, but nevertheless, they're very distinct tasks. So really appreciate you saying this. I think for me, Chair, is in terms of as I support and think about for the commission, it's what Commissioner Chair, Committee Chair Shea said is, let's say, 5 years from now, the commission, that we don't have the oversight, and the intent for the police commission was that vision of that day, as Ms. Grenache said, there wouldn't be federal oversight, but to be able to continue the kind of quality of that oversight so that the city does not regress, right? So how do we position ourselves with that triangle of CIPRA, OIG, and commission such that we are able to mirror the quality of that oversight that currently the federal oversight is providing, right? And can we, even while we're still under court oversight, to start exercising that muscle of how to do it, right? Before the wheels go off, right? And we're left to really assure the community that their vision of when federal oversight is gone, the work and the focus and the attention is still going to be there so that the city doesn't regress. So I think that's a really big question and so as we think about how we relate with each other, the three, columns, pegs relate with each other, it's within that context.
glad we had this discussion, and I'm glad that we sort of set our framework as we begin to talk a little bit about 2.46 and 2.47 and the rest of this enabling ordinance. Sorry it took so long for us to get to this point. Let's perhaps start with 2.46. I can bring it up onto the screen for us to talk about. I think I have it here. I can try to make it as large as possible. I think what I decided to do is I will directly annotate this particular document, save it as we have each meeting, and then send it out to everyone or upload so that we all have the benefit of notes in the work as we're going through. Give me a little bit as this is, I need to, as I annotate, and bear with me as I try to take down what I can. Mac, as this being your section or the CPRA section, do you want to take us through the section and the changes?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Would you like me to flag? I can just begin with, I'm seeing in the commission response to this, there are certain questions, or in the OPC feedback, but I can just, would you prefer I just
Why
walk
don't we
us through this?
Why don't we go section by section, and as we get to the commission feedback portion or anything else that comes to mind, we talk about it, because we're trying to capture both the questions about that feedback, as well as perhaps just walking through and enabling this document and trying to figure out, well, what additional things can we do, change, delete, add to make this work easier or better.
Great. So I'll begin 24610. We have our definitions. I am not aware. It says officer shall mean any sworn individual employed by the department. I'm not aware why that was added. It makes sense as a new definition. And subject officer shall mean the officer who's subject of a complaint of alleged misconduct. I will note, yeah, I guess it takes sworn employee, sometimes, especially after the passage of SB2, there can be investigations of folks who are no longer members of the department, and can drop down to, or are there any questions on the definitions section here?
Actually, now that you mentioned, oh, sorry, Ms. Leonard.
Yes, I just have a quick comment about under the definitions, where it starts with commission, the end of that sentence, department should be on its it should be a new paragraph.
Why don't I just highlight this text as to give ourselves a note that this should be in a new paragraph. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Let's see. Sorry, as I work in real time here. You bring up, but actually,
You put it like
Mac,
a comment
really,
there where you can, oh,
yeah,
I
I'm
see
working
what
on
you're
that.
doing.
I'm working on that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna watch you. I haven't done it like this before.
Working with the technology I got, and not having a Word document of these changes. Let's see if there's some way I can flag this well.
How did you do that? That's not a comment, right?
No, I'm annotating it directly through this Mac's native preview app.
Oh, okay. All righty.
Mac, I appreciate going through section by section, because you just highlighted something that never even occurred to me, which is officer meaning any sworn individual employed by department does not mean officers who have since left the department, have retired, or have been fired. I suppose it's saying department sworn employee technically means that it's a current employee, and this is no change, but can you foresee any changes based on this more explicit spelling out of any sworn individual employed by the department?
That's why the definition is tough there. So let's imagine that there are two incidents that happen a week apart, and or even 6 months apart, and an officer's terminated for the first incident and then still under investigation for the second. Right, we would continue that investigation and come to a disposition. So Twee, maybe you want to sit on that, or any other lawyers on that front. I think that I mean, an officer's someone employed as a who is or has been employed by as a sworn individual by the department, something to that effect. And I will just flag where it says misconduct shall mean an officer's affirmative act. I might take away affirmative. I don't see the value of that. And misconduct's a violation of policy, period.
Okay, sorry, let me see if I can get to, okay, so I see affirmative, so I will highlight that. And do you not think that it looks like they tried to it looks like that's what it was originally. So this sort of distinction between making a distinguishing how it distinguishes affirmative act versus failure to act. Do you think that's
an affirmative act that violates and or failure to act? It's fine as is now that I see it more broadly that way, and or a failure to act in violation of. I mean, because it's a failure to act. No, this excludes it. Things that are not things that are accidents, but are still violations of policy. As I'm reading it.
interesting?
Right. If you make it
Why don't I
affirmative,
just
if you trip and fall and your gun discharges and you hit somebody, I'm not seeing the intent shouldn't necessarily be in the definition of misconduct. Yeah, or excludes unintentional policy violations, laws, and so on.
we'll save that note. Thank you. Okay. And then I will save for myself this particular note, and maybe we can sort of work on resolving it later on about sort of question about former employees. Okay. Why don't we keep moving, work our way through this. The next section, creation.
Great. So this ordinance is based on City Charter Section 604 from Measure LL, and it is in the public interest to facilitate the agent's receipt of public complaints regarding alleged misconduct. We've now capitalized misconduct as it's defined throughout. Thus, some of the agency staff should be located in a street level or ground floor visible office that is accessible by public transportation. And in its initial variation, the commission determines the number of existing agency staff who would work at that other location. This particular proposal takes that and gives it to the agency director, which I can imagine is more legally sound, as the commission's prohibited from directing city employees. And so there's just a responsibility for the agency director to make it work. And I'm seeing Kathy, your hand is raised.
Yeah, so I'm back to that. You know, I just think it's really important, and I know that other people have stressed this, that the office of CIPRA be available to the public. You know, one time I was gonna just stop by and say hi to Mac, and I went to the Dalziel building, if that's the way you pronounce it, and the receptionist was telling us that CIPRA wasn't in that building. In fact, they didn't know who CIPRA was. And I said, well, we're here to see Mac Muir. Do you know who he is? No. And I said, well, I know for a fact that CIPRA's in this building. So I go around to the ledger, and it's not on the ledger either. So, there's got to be some training of the staff downstairs to let them know that CIPRA is here. Because suppose I was a member of the public that wanted to lodge a complaint, I would have been turned away. The only reason I stuck around was because I knew they were in that building. So I don't know if that means who's supposed to let the staff downstairs know. If Mac, you should maybe become familiar with the receptionist down there so they know who you are, and maybe they already do by now because this was some months ago. So yeah, that's a real concern on my part. And then the other thing is under the IG section under creation, she has listed a couple of things. The city shall allocate a sufficient budget. All OIG staff shall be civil servants. And there was just a couple of sentences there that I thought should be transferred over to or copied over to the CIPRA's section, because I don't know if it says anything that the city shall allocate a sufficient budget to CIPRA, and we should definitely have that in there.
I know there's a requirement in terms of the number of investigators. I can double check on the same language, to my understanding, is not there, and I would be more than happy to encourage the city to sufficiently budget for us.
Yeah, and just so that the both creation sections are sort of conform to each other in terms of, because you need a budget, she needs a budget, and if it's set out there that like it is in hers, then it's real clear that the city has a responsibility here.
Yes. And we have, I know it's 1 investigator for every 100 officers is the charter requirement, if I remember correctly, if it's not in the ordinance. But I think this works just very well to just say the same thing.
Okay. That was it for that one. Just A and B copied over to creation under CIPRA.
All right. That brings us to okay.
And
anybody else about? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just if there are any other comments on this particular, Kathy, I really strongly agree. You've seen that I've been committed to getting us what I'll call a storefront location stat. And as the chair mentioned, we've been talking a lot about different ways that we can be out in the community, whether that's at churches or community centers or
Right.
city council persons' offices.
No, I do. I understand that. Yeah, I just wanted it to be kind of in this new iteration.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Going once, going twice. All right. Functions and duties.
So I'll walk through these. Would love to hear from the community members here, whether and how you think these might change. So these are derived from section 604, using the same complaint form as the department regarding all public complaints. I will say that's a unique thing, just as commentary, to Oakland's, where internal affairs and the oversight entity use the same complaint number. And there are some downsides to the accessibility. I think it'll actually make an IAD transition much easier, but I'm seeing 2 hands raised here.
Whoever wants to go, Ms. Grenache, Ms. Leonard.
Yeah, I'm wondering about whether we need to include internally generated complaints. Maybe I'm missing it. I guess it says including complaints from the department and non-sworn, but I don't think that you are necessarily getting those, are you?
OPD announced at the last commission meeting that they're sending them our way. So they are. There is no requirement that they are all sent to us. And frankly, well, I'll leave it at that. There's no requirement right now. I'm more than open to creating that power.
I think maybe that needs to be here.
I'm going to make a note. Let's see.
And that would
we're
just be
talking about.
Apologize.
No. I'll take notes. You direct. You go.
That would be just the deletion of the word public, ultimately. Now, That's an ambitious approach at this juncture in terms of how we would sort it, but I'd rather have more information than less. And that's use the same complaint form as used in receiving all complaints.
That should do it.
All right, help me out. I highlighted the word public. I see all complaints. What was that just now that I may have just missed?
No, it's just that public because use the same complaint form as used by the department in receiving all complaints concerning alleged misconduct. So it's just the deletion of the word public.
Okay. Okay. Then let me make an annotation note here. That's not it. That's not at all what I want to do. Okay. Generated.
Ms.
Okay.
Leonard?
Yes, thank you. That brings to mind to me, I'm thinking of this case that I read about recently in the paper. This officer who was arrested in Contra Costa County for beating up his wife. He was arrested, and I guess the department, I don't know what the department is now doing. But it seems like somebody should have been aware about this. Like, why didn't Contra Costa, or maybe they did, notify Oakland Police Department that this guy was being arrested? If there was some notification, did you know about it, Mac? Because this happened apparently in June of last year. So how does CIPRA find out about police misconduct if IAD doesn't take any action? And we read about it in the paper.
So I will say in all likelihood, I can't speak to the specifics of that case. However, if it's reached the paper, in all likelihood, there's been an M4.1 notification regarding a serious incident. So if an officer is, say, arrested in another jurisdiction and the department becomes aware of that, they are required to notify the chair, myself, and a series of other parties. And so that can happen in a lot of situations.
So were you notified of that particular one?
I can't speak about specific cases.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You can't. Okay, well, I hope that you were. So there's a concern then that there may be cases out there that aren't being investigated because you have no idea that they exist.
Correct.
So I don't know how we can get to the bottom of that, but that is something that we need to think about.
So that speaks to in perhaps IG's office. I know IG Phillips has spoken to this before in different contexts, but the serious incident trigger. So the M4.1 notification is when there's a serious incident, the department must notify X number of parties. Now, the definition of serious, I believe, is what is at issue, and so that could use refining over time, and whether or not that's in this forum is to be determined. But I think that also could be circumvented by just ensuring that we get all the complaints, and that we could be the ones to define serious.
Right. I think beating up your spouse would qualify as serious.
Well,
okay.
It's definitely serious, but we also have to consider the idea, like, how does the department find out about it in the first place, right? I mean, there is an affirmative obligation for officers to report it, but they don't necessarily have to notify the arresting agency or the agencies that arrest them that they are, in fact, police officers. And so it becomes kind of an honor system unless there's some other automatic notification process. There are in some circles when you are, for instance, for the bar, the state bar. If you are convicted of a crime, then there is an automatic notification to the bar through the Department of Justice's reporting system, and it's recording, and it's they notify the bar. But I don't. Is there a similar function that might get there? That's something to, I think, outside of the scope of this, but certainly an issue that we have to deal with, and hopefully we can think about those while also being able to grasp the things that we can.
And then another thing too, do officers have an obligation to report, to self-report? Is that what you were saying too? Should they self-report if they've been arrested?
I am almost certain that that's the case for every city employee.
Okay.
And, I'm not aware of any arrests I haven't been made aware of, but I can promise you I'd let the commission know if I found out about that happening.
And then one last thing, at the bottom of A, the last sentence, a copy of the numbered and date stamp complaint shall be provided to IAD within 1 business day of receipt. But doesn't IAD get 24 hours to submit a complaint to CIPRA? It's not 24, it's 48, isn't it? Or maybe I'm not right.
It's 24, but I'll say in practice, these are business days, and IAD, as we've seen discussed before in prior meetings, I mean, they don't have staff in on the weekends necessarily. So all of this ends up in practice happening within a business day. I find it fair and right. We don't have folks who are on call at night or are on weekends per se.
No, that's not my question.
Oh, okay.
Of course you can't take weekends into consideration. No, but I'm saying IAD is supposed to report cases to you within 24 or 48 hours.
24.
Okay, I don't know where I got 48 from. Okay, all righty. Never mind. I think that's it for me under that. Oh, one last thing. So this is the also it's the reporting section. So I'm moving to H. So H says that at least twice a calendar year, CIPRA is supposed to submit a report to the Public Safety Committee, and it lists a number of items that is supposed to be contained in your report. But one thing, and you and I have talked about this, not in the sense of this report, but just a concern that I have about late submittals to CIPRA. So it would be great if in your report to the Public Safety Committee, you could include the number of times or some way of documenting the late submittals to CIPRA. Because if a case falls behind and we miss a deadline, we want, if it's CIPRA's fault, if it's IAD's fault because they didn't submit files to you on time. Remember we talked like that 2 months, there were a number of cases that were like 2 months late, up to 4 months late. It would be great if the city council knows that, IAD isn't doing their job in getting you the cases within 24 hours.
Absolutely. I'm not opposed to reporting that in any way.
Okay, so that could be like the new number 10 or a number 10. And I don't know how you want to word that, but it was just a concern. In
Why
fact,
don't
I'm going to be talking to that officer that presented that last time. What's his name? Lauren Dorman?
Durham.
I'm going to be having a phone conversation with him probably tomorrow. Mac was nice enough to give me those late submittal information. Yeah, so I envisioned Jesse as number 10. Okay.
Let me why don't I do this? I'm going to flag a number 10 here. And then what I will ask is that I'm going to ask or assign someone to come up with the language for number 10. And I've got two options on the table right at the moment. I've got Mac and I've got you, Kathy. Which one should it be?
I'm more than happy to, unless Kathy, you want to take a first crack at it.
It's up to you. You know, we can fashion some language together. It shouldn't take too much.
I'll send you a draft email, and then
All righty, thank you.
perfect.
I'm going to use very inartful language to try to get at the issue, which is reporting on any issues vis-a-vis CPR between CPRA and IAD information sharing on, and leave it relatively vague.
Yeah, and my concern arose because a number of those cases that were 2 to 4 months late were use of force cases. So the time was ticking, and it didn't leave SIPRA with a lot of time to do their investigation.
No.
Let me just make sure that we're whole on this particular point on H, and then I can just ask Mac to bring us very quickly through B through G, as they're relatively straightforward.
Sure.
So I'll jump into that. So on B, making complaint forms available to the public by posting them online on the website, and making information about the complaint process available at other public locations to be determined by the agency director. All pretty straightforward. Ensure that investigators receive any necessary training in conducting fair and impartial investigations. Can be interpreted in many different ways, but subject to the successful performance of the agency director. Request the commission to issue a subpoena, and to compel. I actually, now seeing this with clear eyes, strongly suggest removing subject officer, and just to compel. I mean, perhaps someone else can speak to the original intent of this. I would just say, keeping it broad, you may want to be able to just say anyone, or to compel any member of the city. If you have an intake technician at Internal Affairs who's a witness in a case, maybe you need to issue a subpoena, or all sorts of personnel, not just subject officers or officers, or perhaps people who have resigned, for example.
It sounds like, if I could just sort of help out here, is that perhaps it should also cover non-sworn personnel
Yeah.
of the department.
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily needs to narrow the scope of the commission's subpoena power in any way. Section E, video record interviews for all subject officers who've committed class 1 offenses. We've got the video cameras. That's all pretty taken care of. A request without requiring the complainant and witnesses of class 1 allegations agree to be audio or videotaped, in consultation with and upon approval of the commission. Establish rules and procedures for the operations of its business, including but not limited to procedures for the intake of complaints. Pretty straightforward. And that's all. I don't have any comments on those other sections. The Public Safety Committee, naturally, in the biannual report, has this data that's requested of the public, of this CPRA director, Ms. Leonard.
Same hand, different hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I lowered my hand.
Okay.
No worries.
And we've got the various bits of data which are really parallel the normal report out to the commission with a little bit of additional information. So unless anyone else has a flag here, I don't see any issues that jump out. One thing that I will just make folks aware of is the demographics of complainants. The agency, this is from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and within police departments. It's a choice on how you categorize, and I understand that the CPRA in many cases doesn't, unless a person proactively says this is my race, they don't provide demographic information, and it's something that we'll be working on streamlining. So perhaps that doesn't need to be changed there because it's to the extent that it's available. But right now there's a pretty limited data set.
Ms. Grenache.
In previous CPRB reports, they also indicated the area of Oakland where the complaints originated from. And I think they usually contained a map with each of the districts and the number of complaints from each district. And I think that actually is helpful to the city council to know which areas of the city most of the complaints are emanating from. So I don't see that here, and I think it might be good to include it.
And in section 1 that requests the council district where the complaint originated, which captures some of the spirit of what you're describing.
Yeah, okay, I missed it. Thank you.
And the goal over time will be to just map those in a precise way, or in a way that allows some anonymity, but still gets across the point you were mentioning.
Yeah, thank you.
I like how it goes directly to the Public Safety Committee and identifies council district. That's very specific there, as opposed to like the different areas or the beats. Okay. All right. Moving to agency director section 2.46040.
And I'm gonna flag, I believe there were some questions on the commission document, but agency director shall report to the commission and shall be responsible for day-to-day operations of the agency, which the responsibilities shall include but not be limited to the following. Ms. Leonard, see hand raised.
Oh, no, go right ahead. I was just going to follow you when you were done.
Sounds good. Identify staff positions in addition to the position of investigator necessary to perform agency's functions and duties, which will someday include that policy role. Assigning complaints to investigators, consulting with investigators regarding and monitoring the progress of their investigations. I mean, I'll just say it out loud that some of these tasks are inherently delegated and must be, given the volume of the work, and will need to be increasingly delegated as the agency expands, but useful to have in here. Monitor the workload of all agency staff, report to the commission once a month, and this is what we see on a monthly basis: the case number of the complaint, the initials of the investigator assigned to investigate the complaint. I will say the value of that, the initials, I'd love to know the history of that, but perhaps for another time. The date the complaint was filed with the agency, we see the value of seeing the potential delays when it comes to cases coming from one entity to the other, and the date by which the investigation must be completed if it's to meet those goals, and the 3304 date, the date of the incident, and if we go down, it requires the agency to investigate. Okay, so then this brief description of the case, along with number of times a department employee refused to comply with a written request for information, and the number of times an officer refused to comply with a valid subpoena. And I might suggest, in the spirit of the subpoena definition, saying number of times a person of interest in an investigation, or let's see, I would say a subject or witness refused to comply with a valid subpoena, is perhaps tells a bigger story.
Well, okay, we're good. Why don't you, well, I see Ms. Grenache's hand went up or specifically around this particular point in time. Why don't we take, well, Ms. Leonard also had her hand up first, kind of following. So why don't I be fair? Ms. Leonard and then Ms. Grenache.
Okay, I just have two questions. Okay, so on on D4, is
Oh,
4
give me-
basically what I was requesting for H10? The date a
That's it.
complaint was filed with IAD and the date it was forwarded to CIPRA?
Yes, essentially, it just provides that information. So that's why it's in the. I mean, our report out is just based strictly on this. So that's
Right,
why
so
you have
this
those
one
two
is
columns.
right. So this one is the reporting to the commission. The other one was the reporting to the Public Safety Committee.
Correct.
So perhaps we could use this same language then for H.
For that
For
H10,
H, the new 10. What do you think?
it works. Frankly, it would be a very smooth solution, as we have
Okay.
that information easily transposed.
Yeah, as long as we get those dates. Okay, that was one thing.
Done.
Okay, so the date it was filed. Okay. So let me think aloud here. So if the complaint originates, okay, I'll think about this later because I want us to move on. Okay, number 8.
Ms. Grenache? Oh,
Oh no, I'm not done. Number
sorry,
8.
sorry.
That first sentence seems incomplete to me. What do you think?
So it is if instead of either, if it should say whether, but you're supposed to know whether or not this is required to be investigated in sum and substance.
So
It's not a clear sentence to me. Is anyone else having that trouble with the sentence?
Yes.
I would recommend starting with the D above, which is the agency director must include the following information in the monthly written report. And then going to section 8, which is, I think it's saying identifying if city charter section requires the agency to investigate the complaint and whether the complaint involves use of force, in custody deaths, profiling, First Amendment assemblies. And then, so if the agency is required to investigate the complaint, the director needs to identify which one of these categories. And if it does not, then they must give a brief general description.
Does that seem like a clear read to you? I'm just asking because it just didn't seem clear to me, and I'm wondering if anybody else reading this thinks that it could be more clearly stated. It could be me.
I take your point. It is quite awkward, and I'm going to make that note and see if we can come back, sort of get some eyes on it.
Okay, and then on D2, do we leave that in the name of the complainant? Because it seems like I had a conversation with Max saying that it's against the law to include the name of the complainant.
Yes, that's
Or is this report just going to the commission and it won't be read aloud on to the public?
No, this is the report out that you see. The name of the complainant is not there. Am I correct?
On D2, it says you have to identify the name of the complainant.
Oh, yeah, that should be deleted. Would be my
Right.
our
Because
agency
that's
agency
against
attorney
state
would say
law.
that. Yeah.
Okay. Unless, of course, do you ever have a case where the complainant says, I want to be identified? Or as a rule, you just say, you know what, it's just safer not to name them at all.
Even my memory of the law would even prohibit sharing that, right? That providing one person's information, if you provide a complainant's information, you could compromise other people involved. So I think that if you say, I want this disclosed, our starting point would be, then you can disclose it in your own time, but we wouldn't necessarily put that
Okay.
Yeah.
All righty. That's it for me with that section. Thank you.
Ms. Grenache.
Yeah, I'm wondering, going back to the comment that I made in my letter earlier today about 2.45, whether or not the issue should be addressed here, namely that whenever there is an investigation, an external investigation that is directed by the city administrator, that the SIPR director must have the same access to the information as the external investigator receives. I think that that might solve the problem that I was highlighting in my issue around the that section where the city is authorized to do an independent investigation. This all goes to correcting the problem that the commission had with respect to Chief Armstrong, where the city directed an external investigation to be done, but the commission had no way to validate or invalidate those findings, and therefore was unable to play a part in the ultimate decision. So I think somewhere in this section, there needs to be a directive that the SIPR director have immediate access to all information from internal affairs that is provided to any external investigator hired by the city. And it doesn't even have to be just the chief. It could be any other officer that the city decides they need to do an external investigation on.
So this section being the section involving sort of powers and where is it up here? Job responsibilities.
Right.
Is
One of the
is this
responsibilities of
is
the
this the right
SIPR director is to ensure that he is able to provide the commission with his own input into any investigation that is done by the city or done by an external investigator hired by the city. That he is required as part of his job to generate his own report to the commission, whether it's that he does his own investigation or whether it's that he reviewed the external investigation or whatever, that the commission be able to have the findings that are done not only by the external investigator, but by their own agency director.
If I may, I think it might, while your point is very much taken, and I think we have the same goal, I think that might fit better in 246030, which is functions and duties of the agency, where I wouldn't want to fail a performance evaluation because the city conducted a secret investigation. But I understand that it would be required for, I would like to put the requirement on the city. For example, if they contracted with an outside investigator to build this into the framework of the contract, as opposed to requiring our agency to figure it out on the back end, perhaps. Whichever one makes that happen most cleanest, I'm for it, even if it's in, of course, my job description.
But I don't see how in this ordinance that involves the responsibility of the commission, SIPRA, and the OIG that you can insert something that is a requirement of the city.
Oh, we do it. We have it. This enabling ordinance talks about how the city attorney has to report to us and present to us on a biannual basis or twice a year. And it's one of the changes that they've made. They want to only report to us once a year.
So where would you put this then? Where would you put
That's
this?
That's actually very interesting, and I think I would like to percolate on it a little bit. I sort of see what you're saying, and I can think of a lot of things that could go into it. So, for instance, I guess the workflow is that the city knows through the department, excuse me, I'll turn my camera on. The city knows through the department that something requires an external investigation. Something comes up and either the city finds out about it and gets an outside investigator, or the department finds out about something, looks at it and says, oh no, we can't handle this. We need to give it to an outside investigator, contacts the city attorney's office or the city, and they hire an external investigator. So at start, those are the two entities that have the information that an external investigation is occurring. If we go from that point, then we can say either one of those entities might have the requisite notification, goes to Commission Counsel's point about serious investigation. And then we go to sort of like what information, sorry, Chair, I'm going to mute you a second. At what point does the director of the agency plug in to that? Whether it's a preemptive step prior to the commission doing anything of having to obtain that information, and whether that should be either automatic by the city or built into, or by the department, or needs to be an affirmative step by the agency director, or it's once the M4 notification comes into the commission, which director also gets those, whether the commission needs to make an affirmative step to direct the agency director to go do it. There's lots of ways that we could do it. I think we need to have a discussion about what is the best way to do it and might make the most sense, and frankly makes it so that the city and the department does its requisite steps first to get us to that point. And then we talk about, well, then how does the director go to access those, under which provision, and does that change depending on which provision we're asking him to do, whether it's to investigate or to just monitor.
Yeah, and I think IG Phillips may have some thoughts about this as well. So when she gets back, maybe it would be good to get her input on this also.
Yeah, at its core, our agency's position, and certainly my position on this, is that whatever allows us to, if there is an investigation conducted in lieu of internal affairs, that whoever's conducting that investigation has to abide by the same boundaries as we currently do in the concurrent investigative process in sum and substance. But I think we're on the same page there generally.
Chief Jones, any thoughts you want to share that you have about this process that you're able to share with us?
No, I think that makes sense. I think if we're talking about an open case, of course, it wouldn't involve the OIG at that point. So we would only be involved with the closed case. But of course, if the commission decides that they want to direct us to review a closed case, we would definitely be able to do that.
I appreciate that. And I wasn't so much thinking about how the IG plugs in, but as the agency that audits and invests the department and the agency, perhaps you have some thoughts about how the agency might go about fulfilling this function, I guess.
I think when
if not, that's okay.
No, just generally, I think when he deleted the word public, for me, that kind of answers all of that. Because if CPRA is getting all complaints and they're getting all the external complaints, all of them at that point. So I think that'll kind of cover that once you delete the word public from the complaints.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think of that. Thank you. Okay. Let's percolate on this a little bit. I know we're sort of coming up on time, but start thinking about where these sections might be. It might be multiple places. It might be sort of in 2.45 and in 2.46, and maybe in other things as well. Let's just have a take some time to sort of get at this. And Mac, I'm sorry, since I said 2.45 and 2.46, unfortunately given you a little bit of work of maybe thinking about how it might work. I know I heard you suggest that it would be in 030, which is agency sort of duties and requirements, functions and duties, excuse me.
Yes.
asking for some help about how that's going to look and what the language might be.
Great.
As we sort of think about it. Okay. All right, we're still on 2.46 and we're at E, F, G, and H. We also have 10 minutes left. And we haven't quite gotten to some of the questions and some of the things that were in this commission document, but we're doing pie in the sky work a little bit. Sorry, y'all. Let's see. First, I guess before, well, I don't think we're going to get too far in 10 minutes, but Mac, maybe you could, since we're at the section, we're at G, maybe give us a little bit. If not, if you don't think 10 minutes will cover it or answer some of these questions, we could talk about scheduling next. Because I just want to bring up one small point about scheduling.
Oh, so would you like me to run through these last four and then go from there? Or?
You know what? Let me see. Let me first do the scheduling in case people need a hard stop at 8:30. So we are scheduled for every Monday from 6:30 to 8:30. I am prepared to honor that. I just want to make note that there are some holidays coming up on Mondays. And I don't know if there's City of Oakland holidays. I know there's state holidays at the very least because the courthouse is closed. Next Monday is a state holiday. City of Oakland open, closed.
We're open, I think. Next Monday?
What's the holiday?
Yes. Oh, it's a birthday of some sort or president. I think it might be like Lincoln's birthday.
I
No.
think it's
On the 19th.
President's Day.
Is it President's Day?
President.
Yeah.
So there, we have February 19th off.
Okay. Not that one, the week before, which I think is
No, it's all. We do
My
have.
calendar shows that President's Day is the 19th,
Yeah.
which is a Monday.
okay. It might be Lincoln's birthday or something. And
I thought
Okay.
they
It
wrapped
sounds
all
like
the presidents up in one bundle.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was my understanding too. Yeah.
Not the courts. Having a president, court judge.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like we're all working on Monday, so we're good for next Monday, and then we'll have a discussion about the following Monday next week. How about that? All right. Knowing that, thank you. Much appreciated. Mac, why don't you take us as far as you can in the next 8 minutes?
Yep. Section E, conducting annual job performances of all agency staff. I will note that for many agency staff, especially anyone who's new, there's at least 4 evaluations over the course of the first year on staff. This is very time intensive, and to the extent that it's here, I appreciate it. It's also pretty limited access as it's personnel information and hard to measure, but from a commission standpoint. But it is there, and it is definitely required of any agency director to ensure their staff is evaluated. Respond to questions and issues raised by the public as permitted by applicable law. So self-explanatory. And then G, preparing a proposed budget for the agency. And this timing allows for the commission to review a proposed budget in advance of a mid-cycle amendment, and just to ensure that the commission sees the proposed budget in advance of council.
There are some questions in our document. Chair, do you have it up? Some of these questions?
Questions in our document?
Yep. 2.46.040 G, agency director. It kind of talks about generally sort of about oversight.
Submit the
Do you see that? I'm not really seeing how that. I suppose it's a more general question about the sort of the tasks of oversight and whether or not certain things like the budget falls under that category, and to what extent, perhaps.
Well, if right now with the word may submit, that's not shall submit. So what would be the purpose of having that? It says the proposed budget shall be delivered to the commission by February 1st. Has that passed, Matt?
Oh, yeah.
In addition to submitting the agency's proposed budget to the commission, the agency director may submit the proposed. That seems
to
strange. You shall deliver it to us, but you may submit it to the mayor.
I have a certain idea of where that may come from. It also is duplicated down in the IG section.
Yeah, I think there's a benefit to sharing the budget with the proposed budget with more parties.
Well, I can see where you shall deliver it to us, but shouldn't you shall submit it to the mayor and the city administrator? Not
No,
mayor.
Chair, the charter says it goes to the commission submits the proposed budget to the mayor and the city administrator, and it includes the CPRA and the OIG's budget.
I'm sorry, are you saying that the commission submits all of our direct reports budgets together? Okay.
Yeah, that's why the may is in there, because it gives the agencies the options of sending it directly to the mayor and city administrator.
I see.
As an option to, I can see, I can play both sides on this issue, right? Like, I could see it from the agency perspective of they don't want the commission to be tinkering or messing or line item editing of their budget, especially because they are, and they're, as the agency heads, kind of the best position to make decisions about what that staff might be, what their needs may be, and how much out should be allocated to them. I could see the flip side, which is that perhaps that it may be one giant pie, and a commission may need to allocate across all three branches exactly what the funding may be. And so having it submitted directly to the mayor or city administrator may be seen as an overstep, or maybe a way to sort of influence the city as to what the appropriate budget might be for that particular agency. I don't know what the right answer is. That's just kind of what I can see, right?
I understood it.
And
each entity submitted its own budget last year. We didn't have any input into the IG's budget request or SIPR's budget request, if I'm not
well,
mistaken.
that did happen because there weren't these particular guidelines. But I mean, it's part of it is the way this charter structure works out is that the commission's supposed to send all three together in a proposed package together to the city. Am I wrong about that? That's what I recall reading, and it's just
I remember that too, Jesse, that the commission sends them all.
I haven't participated in that process before, although I will be soon. But it says the city shall allocate a sufficient budget for the commission, including the agency and the OIG to perform its duties as set forth in the charter. And
right.
If someone finds the language that prescribes who sends that in and when, I'd love to see it. But I do think, and I suspect the IG's office would feel the same, that there is a significant benefit to us submitting the proposed budget and building that into the process, as oftentimes we're going to be the only ones who know the various personnel details that might shape those decisions.
Do you mean directly? You mean directly to the city and city administrator, right? When you say that?
No, well, that it should be delivered to the commission as a proposal, but that perhaps the option remains to deliver it directly.
Okay, you were looking for a site under the functions and duties of the commission. It says that they are to prepare and deliver to the mayor, the city administrator, and the chief a proposed budget for the commission, the OIG, and CIPRA. That's under 2.45.070D1.
So what's the point then of having this second sentence? In addition
Talking
to,
about,
yeah.
you know what, I'm just going to be really explicit about it. I imagine people aren't feeling too comfortable about it, having all of us here in the same room, but it's a question of, well, sometimes politics comes into play, right? Sometimes you have an agency head or a commission chair, and people that just don't get along together. And it is sort of a way for agency directors or the agency director or the IG to be able to submit their direct budget proposal directly to the mayor, so that the mayor and the city administrator can see what their needs are and not have it be filtered through the lens of the commission. I'll just be explicit about it. Like, I get it. I understand why you might.
I think that's exactly right.
And you know what, I don't feel one way or the other about it, right? But I think it's important that that just be said, so that we can all acknowledge that, maybe get over a little bit of uncomfortableness and think about what is the best way, and is this the language that should be there.
So it's really like a safeguard for the OIG and CIPRA.
Yeah, let's say that
Yeah.
the commission said that we're going to replace 6 of our investigators with outreach folks, and I look at that and I say, well, then our agency can't reach all of its other charter goals, and I am really undiplomatic and can't negotiate or have a conversation about it, and I just say I want to cut through and send it to the city administrator. This creates that avenue. I mean, that's the purpose here. Naturally, the goal is for us to have consensus, which is why this opens with a proposed budget.
I would just say, I agree with Commissioner Shea that does leave an opportunity to, in case there were issues that couldn't be resolved amicably between the director, the IG, and the commission, that the department heads would have an opportunity to go somewhere else. I think that's the reason for the word may, because, you know, if you can discuss it and it can be resolved, then there's no reason to go directly to the mayor or the city administrator. But if there was some issues, then the IG would have an opportunity to go to the mayor and city administrator.
I think that the hope, if I could, just sort of thinking about how this model should work, or that we hope that it works. I think we can all agree that we hope in a perfectly functioning world where everyone has all the time in the world and sort of can sit down and all be in a room together, that the CPRA and the OIG and the commission all come up with their proposed budgets. The OIG and the and CIPRA submit it to the commission, and they all sit down and have a discussion about it, and perhaps sort of think about sort of the coming future trends, the budgets, what's coming down the pipeline, and are able to think about and agree and perhaps have discussion about what it is that their needs are, and whether that sort of aligns with the greater whole of community and civilian oversight. You know, best laid plans often don't work, and I certainly understand that. And I do hope that we can sort of hold that ideal in mind while also having the guardrails that I think we're all looking for or thinking about. And hopefully this section will come up again in the IG and the IG section 2.47. We're running out of time a little bit here. But I hope that we can continue to have these frank conversations about what these sections are, and sort of, do they work? Do they not work? Are they, and do we need them or do we not? And, you know, I can certainly understand coming out of the last year that some people feel like we do. So here we are.
Fair enough.
Thoughts, questions before we I know it's 8:34. I don't want to keep people longer than what we had talked about. Anything that anybody wants to say or mention?
Just last point on this section, I
Mm-hmm.
think that from an agency director perspective, this also, in case the commission is unable to agree on certain points on the budget, allows for a way to cut through that. And which there should be some safeguard if that happens. And that's the last thing that occurs to me on that particular section.
All right. Thank you
Oh,
all.
yeah.
We'll pick up when we around here when we come back in 1 week. Let's also hopefully have some updates or thoughts about where Ms. Grenage's questions about notifications and access to records when external investigations occur. And yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you, Chief Jones, for
Thank you, Jesse.
subbing in. You're welcome to come anytime you want.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you,
you all.
everyone,
Great
for your
meeting.
contributions.
Thanks so much.
I'll send out this tonight and it'll be a part of the safe draft.
Okay, have a
Okay,
great one.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good night.
Have a good night. Stop. Things. Stop it.